and put up mansions. And indeed, the then Minister of Finance, who introduced the bill himself, fueled the expectation. Now, quite often, when individuals complain about the paltry benefits payable under the Provident Fund, they forget that a Provident Fund scheme is based on the principle of individual equivalence. That is, benefits received were related to how much the individual had contributed plus the accrued interest, pure and simple. There is, by this principle, no subsidy to come from any other source. You put in so much, and you took out correspondingly so much. Of course, this principle is the first, but of the lower end in establishing a social security scheme. And indeed, we can point out that most of the advanced countries also started in much the same way with their piecemeal legislation. They started as Provident Fund and then entered into the pension regime. And there is a reason for this. You need to accumulate a lot of funds under the corpus of the fund so that when you transfer it into a pension, you'll be able to meet contingencies that will go beyond the contribution that the individual has made. By the principle of individual equivalence, compounded by an almost fixed rate of interest in a high inflationary economy, payable on members' contributions, one can understand the frustrations and disappointment of contributors when they receive their benefits, which turn out to be paltry sums. For example, SNP benefit statistics show an average superannuation benefit of 57.86 cedis, and we are referring to Ghana old cedis in 1965, rising to 2,523.56 cedis in 1973, and then to 60,817.3 very old Ghana cedis in 1990. That is 25 years later. And I emphasize this point in order to indicate the magnitude of the paltry sums that one received. And if you could put up buildings with this, hallelujah to you. Now, these absolute figures meant nothing when inflation ran in double figures, but with interest on benefits calculated at a fixed 3% compound per annum. The low benefits payments were further made worse by the rigid regulations in assessing the invalidity, death and survivors, and employment benefits, to the extent that in instances of the death and survivors, for example, it took years to process and pay. The net effect was that some members did not bother to even pursue their claims after some time. As for the unemployment contingency, it was on the books only in name. For the entire 25-year period of the Provident Fund, only 40 people succeeded in claiming under this contingency, and the combined benefits paid did not exceed 35,000 cedis. The benefit that became popular was the immigration contingency, and between 1965 and 1990, over 60,000 members succeeded in claiming. Of course, it was again general knowledge that many who claimed to be emigrating and were paid their benefits resurfaced elsewhere in Ghana later. It was a benefit fraught with a lot of fraud. The issue of data integrity was one challenge that dogged the steps of the SNP administration throughout the entire period. Indeed, when people accuse SNP of inefficiency, they point to the lack of data integrity. As a legacy of the State Insurance Corporation's Provident Fund administration days, it became difficult under SNP to solve the problem. There was a palpable inefficiency in managing the scheme. For example, many establishments, including those under the Accountant General's Department, paid contributions of varying amounts periodically without attaching a contribution list which would indicate how much a member was contributing. And even in instances when contributions were accompanied with contribution lists, the errors in quoting Social Security numbers were so huge that they constituted an administrator's nightmare. And when I say this, I know that my colleagues who were managing the scheme at the time would recall the nightmare we had trying to build up the data for contributors, and yet you could not do anything. Today, computerization has brought us very far, but during that time, it was a hell. And you remember that the computer, which I believe, with the assistance of Mr. Hyde, was instituted at the now pension house, occupied the whole of the ground floor. And yet, its capacity does not come anywhere close to even 528 MB. And when they set on the machines to print statements, it took eternity. I remember particularly both the frustrations of SSNIT and also of employers when these statements were sent into the establishments to be updated. Most workers never saw their contribution statements because they could not have done much in correcting the statements. A lot of the information could have been provided by the organization themselves, and they were also overwhelmed. And therefore, quite often, operations people will follow up into organizations and find that the stack of statements that they brought were in somebody's office gathering dust. Meanwhile, contributors were daily calling on SSNIT to furnish them with statements. It was not a happy sight at all. And of course, SSNIT and SIC would have to take the blame for that lapse in the administration. But really, it takes more than one to tango. And if we had had cooperation from both employers and workers, we would have made a lot of headway. Fortunately, after X number of years, SSNIT has largely overcome that problem. But during the period that we are looking at, it was really a case in point. Plainly, huge operational bottlenecks under the administration of the scheme, from registration of members through to payment of contributions and then to payment of benefits, that the tide of expectations among the contributing public that heralded the start of the scheme soon gave way to a tide of rising expectations. Indeed, the Hansard records that workers were very happy, employers were very happy, and naturally the government was also very happy with the advent of the Social Security scheme. And yet, only a few years into the life of the scheme, everybody had become frustrated. And when I mean everybody, not just workers, but employers, government, and SSNIT too. So, the situation wasn't helped by disloyal SSNIT staff who compromised on the regulations through connivance with some employers to outwit the scheme through shady and fraudulent deals. Again, it was something that was known. It was difficult to get the evidence, but I remember very clearly that at one point, SSNIT decided that it would take steps to get evidence against its own staff who were conniving with employers. And therefore, through that exercise, it succeeded in getting some people in the act. They were put before court by SSNIT. SSNIT made sure it was published just for everybody to know that there is no organization worthy of its name that would sanction such an evil practice. Because if you go to negotiate with an employer that you owe so much, oh, give me X, and I would review the records and let it appear as Y, and you pocket the difference, you are being very disloyal. And naturally, some people suffered the consequences of this. Now, One of the things that SSNIT had to do, also to save its good name, was that on the 10th anniversary of the scheme in 1975, the then board decided to institute what we will call a corporate social policy, under which it decided to put up flats for workers in all the regions of the country. And if you throw your mind back to that period, it was a period when, with transfers and also the setting up of organizations, housing was a very major issue confronting the country. And SSNIT thought it could come to the assistance of the nation. And it did this and started with the SSNIT flats, which were dotted throughout the country. But I must indicate that it was not the right way to start a corporate social responsibility policy. And the reason was exemplified when particularly the prototype plan that we used in the South was also taken up north. And if you remember, after the allocations of the flats in the northern region had been made, for a very long time, people didn't move in. And we started wondering what was happening. That down south, there was a clamor for people to be allocated these things, and they were filled. And up north, these buildings had been put up, and people were not moving in. And then we realized that our architectural drawings were not environmental friendly, because it was at variance with the type of architectural drawings that would have helped in the kind of buildings that the people in the north prefer. And it is a lesson that when you want to go into a corporate social activity, you don't decide that I think the people need this and I will give them that. You need to consult with them, let them know that you are prepared to assist them, but let them come with their priorities. And on the basis of their priorities, engage them, and then decide jointly how that program will be implemented. Because not only did the housing program, which we thought we were establishing for the good of the country, become an albatross around the neck of SSNIT, we know of the problems that we have encountered by getting into these things. To the extent that today, when there is an investment with the tag of SSNIT, on it, many people look at it differently. It is like it is our money and it should be given to us free of charge. That attitude has not helped us, and it has affected the management of the SSNIT flats. Even though today we have sold them, we know the problems that we have encountered with maintenance. And even after we have sold them, we still come back and help, because we realize that if we are not careful, the image of the organization will be affected. But at the end of the day, let me say that all said and done, it was better that the Social Security scheme was started at all, with all its imperfections. For the world of workers would have been grimmer than now in the absence of a Social Security scheme. Today, the lessons under the Provident Fund days have informed the country and the administration of the scheme to correct some obvious errors. Thus, today, the Social Security scheme in Ghana is a much improved version on the Provident Fund, thanks to the wisdom of the originators of the idea, thanks to the administrators of the scheme, SSNIT. I thank you very much.
And ladies and gentlemen, let's do it one more time for Mr. J.E. Alute Papo. We're so grateful for your insights, and to God especially for the benefit of hindsight, that from afar you can see the errors that were committed before. It's particularly instructive, to note all the, the things that went wrong. I once worked in life assurance, and I can testify of the fraud that, took place back in the day. Where was Anas during all that time? But that was the past, ladies and gentlemen, and in a short while we shall be coming to the present. But allow me to introduce to you, joining us for this celebration, the Deputy Minister for Employment and Labor Relations, representing the Sector Minister. Please welcome the Honorable Baba Jamal. Glad to have you, sir. And he's also a general manager in charge of administration, or was a former general manager in charge of administration at SNIT. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. O.K. Ebobonsra. Thank you very much, sir. We'd like to recognize all CEOs and representatives of SNIT trustee companies. Are you here? All CEOs? We salute you. Thank you for coming. I'm told the name is Ebobonsra. Thank you very much, Prof. It's been a long walk from 1965 to 1991. The past had its own challenges, but let's see the present and what it bodes for you and I. Speaking to us on social security now from 1991 to 2010, please welcome a former General Manager Operations SNIT, Mrs. Gifty Antechi.
Madam Chairperson, members of the board, the Director General, members of the executive, managers, staff past and present, invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me associate myself with Ms. Alute and also register my sincere thanks and appreciation for the privilege and honor done me to be here this afternoon. I'm humbled by the recognition, for I'm mindful of the fact that there are general managers past and present who could have handled this assignment. I'm most grateful to you. Let me also align myself with him and say, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary celebration of the Trust, I take this opportunity to pay tribute to administrators, staff, past and present, other stakeholders, employers, employees, who have over the years contributed in diverse ways to make this scheme what it is today. It's not been easy. But we are grateful that despite all odds, the scheme has survived, and it is our hope that it will survive into perpetuity as envisaged. The letter inviting me to this symposium asked for a 30-minute paper on SNIT from 1991 to 2010. Madam Chairperson, you will agree with me that this is a Herculean task. I therefore, at this stage, ask for understanding from the administrators, staff, past and present, and other stakeholders if I skip programs and activities that are dear to your heart. My presentation will be along the following lines. The PNDC Law 247, which introduced the pension scheme, internal organization to deliver the scheme, achievements and challenges, investments, financial health, and sustainability of the scheme, clamor for change that culminated in Act 766, and conclusion. A 7-year-old girl was asked to describe love. She said, "Love is when my grandma tells my grandpa she likes his shirt, and as a result, he wears it every day, no matter what. She went on to say, "You shouldn't say, 'I love you,' if you don't mean it. But if you mean it, then you should say it all the time, because people easily forget." Social security is defined by International Labour Organization as protection which society provides for members through a body of measures against the economic and social distress that would otherwise be caused by stoppage of substantial reduction of earnings resulting from sickness, maternity, unemployment, invalidity, old age, death, and the provision of medical care and provision of subsidies for families with children. I have quoted this definition because, as the 7-year-old girl said, people easily forget. The basic principles underlying the definition are: 1, an assurance that the standard of living of the individual and families will not be unduly impaired by social and economic influences. It provides income when some or all sources of income are terminated or disrupted. Again, it's not meant to make you rich, but the fundamental purpose is to give individuals and families confidence that the standard of living and quality of life will not, insofar as is possible, be gently eroded by social and economic eventualities. Out of the 4 most popular basic mechanisms for providing social security, SSNIT operated 2. Mr. Lute has aptly described the Pensions Provident Fund Scheme from 1965 to 1990. The Social Insurance Scheme was from 1991 to date. The PNDC Law 247, 1991. The Provident Fund Scheme, as you have heard, failed to address the above principles and thus was unable to meet the aspirations of workers. The desire to address the social needs of workers culminated in the promulgation of the PNDC Law 247 in 1991. It converted the Provident Fund system, which paid a one-time lump sum benefit, into a pension scheme. The expectations in 1991 were enormous. For workers, they thought that the National Pension Scheme, as introduced, was going to be a panacea for their retirement challenges. The key features of the PNDC Law 247 gave this assurance, for it attempted to address the major limitations of the Provident Fund Scheme. Coverage. It was national in context and more encompassing. It covers the cleaner, the messenger, and top management. Membership was compulsory for all employees who had an employer-employee relationship. There was no room for casual, temporary, contract, or a part-time worker. The mandatory nature was meant to make it easier to provide social protection for as many members as possible. The self-employed in the informal sector, which constituted more than 80% of the working population, were to join on voluntary basis. They were, however, given the flexibility to determine their mode of payment, either monthly, quarterly, biannually, or yearly. The scheme was self-financing. It was financed through contributions of the employer and the employee, the self-employed, and return on the investment of the contributions. Benefits. It paid periodic benefits instead of lump sum, which ensured protection throughout the contingency. The benefits were paid as a matter of right. Benefits were annually adjusted to reflect prevailing economic situations, for it was designed to provide adequate protection for workers on retirement in the face of inflation. Provided for 3 contingencies: old age, invalidity, and death. Full pension was earned at age 60 with minimum contribution of 240 months. Reduced pension 55 and 59 years with the same minimum contribution. 25 lump sum option was available for both full and reduced pension. Provision was also made under the transitional period for those who had collected part of their benefits and were still in employment to pay back what they collected, plus 6% interest within 6 months of coming into force of the PNDC Law 247 and continue to contribute until they retire to qualify for pension. The principle of solidarity and risk pooling made it possible for today's worker to finance the benefits of those currently on pension. It was portable. It recognized the movement of workers from one organization to the other. Benefits were paid as long as a member fulfills the qualifying conditions, irrespective of the number of organizations worked for. The trust was mandated to carry out specific functions: register employers and workers, collect contributions, keep accurate records of members, manage investment funds, and pay benefits to eligible members. Internal organization to deliver on the scheme. In order to position the trust to carry out its mandate, the organization had to undergo internal restructuring to deliver. 3 functional areas were created: operations, finance, and administration. Extensive training programs were organized internally and externally to broaden capacity and the horizon of staff. The World Bank approved funding for survey of the informal sector and staff training in specialized areas. Madam Chairperson, by 1996, over 50% of the staff had benefited from some form of training program, either locally or externally. The training program spanned all sections of the organization, from top management to the security personnel. A staff rationalization exercise carried out to improve the human resource base reduced staff strength from 3,500 to approximately 2,000. Thereafter, competent professionals were recruited for IT, actuarial, accounts, legal, and compliance. Staff were encouraged to improve their backgrounds by instituting policies and study leave programs. To ensure acceptance and full compliance with the new law, the trust carried out an extensive public education on the scheme through the media. The special attention on employers and workers was based on the recognition that the introduction of the new pension scheme would not yield much without their total support and cooperation. Claims department, investment departments were established for prompt payment of benefits and sound investments. A corporate planning department was established, and the trust prepared its first corporate plan in 1994 for the period 1995 to 1999. This served as a blueprint to ensure staff discharge their responsibilities. The trust also recognized the need to use modern technology instead of passbook because of the advantages it presented in dealing with ever-increasing numbers. The passbook system, which was introduced to manage data, was abandoned in the early 1990s. Although it was manageable in small institutions, it was a nightmare for financial institutions and organizations with extensive branch network. Computerization operational activities was therefore pursued with vigor. The local area network was developed for computers of the branches to communicate with head office. The benefits system at head office was automated, and the Oracle HRM system was installed in HR. Unfortunately, most of the targets of the corporate plan were not achieved, partly because of the adverse economic situation in the country at the time and poor monitoring process. The immediate response to the challenges was the drawing up of the first strategic plan to guide and direct the activities of the organization over the period 2002 and 2006. The objectives were similar to the corporate plan: process and pay benefits accurately and promptly, expand coverage, make benefits adequate and relevant. A number of strategic initiatives were put in place to achieve our number one objective of processing and paying benefits promptly. Key among these were the Age 54 projects. This entailed liaising with members of the scheme and the establishment to authenticate the financial and biodata of members aged 54 and above, so that their benefits could be processed and paid promptly. Refocusing the work of the inspector. The focus shifted from the employer and his obligations to the employee to enable us handle issues that emerge when a claim is lodged. Like Mr. Lotech said, we issued a number of statements of accounts. So strenuous efforts were therefore made in building good quality data. By 2005, 70% of benefits were processed with in-house data. This was a complete departure from the past, where sometimes members were asked to personally go around to collect and bring financial data to enable the trust process and pay their entitlements. Redesigning of a special pension scheme to suit the informal sector by addressing their concerns with the informal sector. For the first time in the organization, Best Employer Awards was instituted to reward employers whose compliance with the law was, award employers whose compliance with the law was exemplary and to motivate and encourage others. We readjustment of indexation formula to emphasize the principle of solidarity in social insurance, and that this, all pensioners were given an across-board flat amount plus a percentage increase, which improved to some extent the situation of the less fortunate pensioners. A consultant assisted in restructuring the organization, establishing new staffing levels and appraisal system aligned to the organizational goals and aimed at rewarding on the basis of creativity and hard work. Intensification of public education and publication of trust-audited financial accounts in the print media. Challenges, achievements after implementation of PNDC Law 247. Low coverage. The underlying desire and expectation to expand coverage to all workers in formal and informal sectors of the economy did not fully materialize. Some employers with the coalition of workers did not register. Some structured their salaries to evade payment, and ignorance and financial needs led some workers to collude with their employers to evade payment. Collaboration with an internal revenue on the part of the trust did not yield the desired result. Low economic activity and incomes of the majority of people in the informal sector did not make the scheme popular. Additionally, the design of the formal scheme was unattractive to the informal sector. Processing of benefit took relatively long periods because of incomplete and inaccurate data, as already mentioned. Difficulty in releasing student loan guarantors as a result of the introduction of the student loan scheme, under which beneficiaries required at least 2 guarantors who must be members of the SNIT scheme. Low pensions. Pensions earned were based on a member's 3 best years' salary. Unfortunately, earnings were generally low, and this affected pensions paid in the country. Difficulty in collecting contributions. Even though the law empowers SNIT to prosecute defaulting employers, for some time, the scheme was unwilling to apply the maximum penalties. The trust initially felt that ruthless prosecution of employers might endanger the employment security of the workers, whose protection was being ensured. Employers were therefore allowed to negotiate payment of their overdue contributions, whilst penalties were waived for others. Inadequate and misapplication of resources and poor work ethics of field staff also contributed to the problem. At the governmental level, the trust entered into special arrangement with government for outstanding contributions to be cleared, sometimes through debt equity swap. Despite these challenges, the organization chalked some successes. The growth rate was substantial. In 1991, the establishment population was roughly 11,000. By the year 2000, this has increased to nearly 14,000. By 2010, it has increased to over 34,000, representing a growth rate of over 200%. For active membership, by 1991, the active membership was around 600,000. By 2000, this has increased to over 851,000. And by 2010, it was over 900,000. The pensioner population. We started in 1991 with 971. By 2000, this has increased to 43,000 approximately. By 2010, it has increased to 108,000. The informal sector. A new scheme designed for them in 2005, registered about 7,000 workers by the end of the year. By the year 2010, we have over 79,000 on their registers. High international reputation for the organization. The National Pension Scheme received a wave of international reviews and attracted the attention of International Social Security Association. It adopted Ghana's scheme as a model for other social security schemes for Africa. Ghana thus became a source of inspiration for many African countries wishing to convert from Provident Fund into pension scheme. We have examples like Uganda, Tanzania, and Sierra Leone. SSNIT has since been a haven for the training of staff for social security pensions in Africa. In fact, the African Regional Office of ISA to date continues to use SSNIT staff for their training programs. The National Health Insurance funding includes 2.5. The National Health Insurance, I think you should applaud to that. The National Health Insurance Scheme funding includes 2.5% social security contributions from the formal sector. Contributors and pensioners are entitled to minimum care without contributing to the scheme. The introduction of minimum health care benefit for pensioners can be described as an additional benefit introduced under the scheme. Investments. One of the main statutory mandates is to invest the contributions collected. As a partially funded scheme, contributions alone are not enough to pay benefits, so returns on investments provide the other major source of funds. The trust adopted the normal criteria guiding social security investment, that is high yield, safety, liquidity, diversification, and social economic utility. SSNIT also considers investment in employment generation as basic strategy through which membership of the scheme may be increased. Any investment which has such potential is therefore considered a priority. Additionally, as a duty, SSNIT is challenged to maximize the returns on its investment to enable it to meet payment of benefits as they become due. In the light of the above consideration, on the promulgation of the Social Security Law in 2047, which introduced a pension scheme, the board and government granted management's request to move SSNIT funds from government treasury and notes into high-yielding investment assets such as equities, commercial, and residential real estate. The trust thus became the largest institutional investor in the country. Some of the key investments are financial institutions, Carl Bank, Ghana International Bank. In services, we are in the Metro Mass Transit Company, the abattoirs, the Trust Hospital. In hospitality, Golden Beach Hotels Limited, Hotel Investment Limited, the managers of Labadi Beach Hotel. In manufacturing, you find the trust in Best Block, Temalube Oil. In real estate, you find them Ghana Hostels Limited, Giselle, Brawl. And in commercial property, World Trade Center, Pension House Car Park, Pyramid House, Trust Towers, Rich Towers, and what have you. Residential accommodation, like Mr. Lotte said, all over the country. Sakumono Estate, Adenta SSNIT Flats, Anaji Estate, Eswe Yabua, and numerous land banks. Energy. In 2010, the trust invested in the energy sector to support government effort in providing adequate energy for industrial and domestic use. The overriding objective was to diversify investment portfolio to reduce risks and support the economy. Financial health and sustainability of the scheme. Social security schemes are long-term programs, and their viability and sustainability are measured by actuarial valuations. SSNIT uses an in-house team for internal valuations annually and engages external actuaries every 3 years. Some have come from the US Social Security Administration, the UK Government Actuary Department, and the International Labour Organization. All reviews show that the scheme is financially and actuarially sound. Madam Chairperson, the advent of the National Pension Act 2008, Act 766, in January 2010, brought a reduction in the contribution rate from 17.5% to 11%, resulting in the loss of contribution income to the scheme. The shortfall in contribution income implies less capital will be available for investment. The law also enhanced all levels of benefit to be paid to beneficiaries. Notwithstanding these challenges, the professionals are confident that the reserve will sustain the fund for the next 20-30 years. In fact, year reserve for 1991 was 2 million Ghana cedis. By 2000, it has moved to 195 million Ghana cedis, and by 2010, it is around 3 billion Ghana cedis. Clamor for change, culminating in Act 766. Unfortunately, strategies and our efforts failed to completely curb the agitations of labor, particularly the public sector, to return to Cap 30 pension. Teachers, who form a significant portion of the trust contributor population, took to the street to express their discontentment about the pension scheme and were supported with other groups like the Civil Servants Association. The labor agitations, to a large extent, was based on the more favorable lump sum component of the pensions under Cap 30 than under SNICH scheme. Additionally, there was a perception that the private sector could better manage the scheme to enhance retirement benefits. The president at the time, His Excellency J.A. Kufuor, responded swiftly by setting up a presidential commission on pension under Mr. T.A. Bediakun to review the existing pension schemes and make recommendations for a sustainable scheme. The commission, after its inauguration, made a countrywide tour to solicit the views of labor. Presentations made at the commission indicated that people were not happy with the SNIT pension. The nation's failure to adequately address the issue of salaries for workers, both in the private and public sector, continued to impact on pensions. Additionally, the scheme had for a long time been the only source of retirement income for members, and coupled with the fact that the pensions were inadequate, led to unfulfilled expectations among pensioners. The Commission recommended a 3-tier pension scheme comprising 2 mandatory schemes and a voluntary scheme. The government accepted all the recommendations of the Bediakun Commission. The National Pension Act 2008, Act 766, was promulgated in December 2008 and formally launched by His Excellency Professor J.E.A. Mills in September 2009. The provisions of the Act attempted to address some of the shortcomings of the PNDC Law 247. It introduced a contributing 3-tier scheme comprising Tier 1, administered by SNIT, Tier 2, fully funded by privately managed, and a voluntary fully funded privately managed Provident Fund and Pension Scheme. The new scheme, for the first time in over 40 years, introduced private participation and some competition within the pension industry. The objective was to provide an enhanced retirement income security for workers by introducing multiple benefits. To ensure one and sustainable pension scheme was set up to replace the many parallel schemes in the public sector, the Act made provision for the unification of all existing public schemes, including Cap 30, within a period of 5 years from the date of commencement of the 3-tier scheme. A National Pension Regulatory Authority, NPRA, to ensure compliance with the Act by enforcing uniform set of rules and regulations for all pension schemes in the country, was instituted. The governing body of the trust was changed from Board of Directors to Board of Trustees. Investments for the first time were externally permitted. The minimum contribution period was reduced from 240 months under PNDC Law 247 to 180 months of 15 years. The guaranteed pension period increased to 15 years from 12 years under the PNDC Law 247. Return on contribution and interest at 75% prevailing treasury bill rate, paid as lump sum to members who fail to qualify for pension or make the 180 months contribution. Contribution rates for employer increased from 12.5% to 13% of the approved monthly equivalent of the national minimum wage. This is to enable the trust continue to institute reasonable minimum pension to help the vulnerable members whose salaries are far below minimum wage. SSNIT is enjoined to keep an account for each member and to issue statement of accounts to contributors annually. In the face of these challenges, the trust re-engineered its operations. A new business process which introduced the gatekeeping concept in the contribution collection and contribution report management process was put in place. The objective was to ensure that the trust fulfills its obligations under the law. The new business process thus became the key driver for the Operations Division's action plan for 2010 and a key part of